Hi, Kumutha. Good afternoon. How are
Hi
you?
there. Thank you so much, Pino. Such a pleasure.
Likewise. Thanks for joining me today. I'm so excited to speak to you and looking forward to our conversation. We're going to talk about AI, the labor market, all the economic pressures, what's going on. It's a crazy time right now in our world. But before that, can you give us a little introduction? Tell us a little bit of who you are and what you do.
Absolutely. Again, a pleasure to join you. So I've spent 15 plus years working in the international media landscape, everything from Bloomberg to Yahoo Finance and a whole host of various media organizations, both in Europe, in North America. My most recent stint was at BNN Bloomberg. And after that, I decided to leverage all of my experience and found my content creation and communications agency. So I host global conferences. I also advise CEOs on their branding strategies, and I do great interviews like this with interesting people. So it's been a
Awesome.
real wonderful transition for me.
Awesome. Perfect. Perfect. Well, I'm like I said, I'm excited to speak to you, but I guess what I want to jump right into is AI. It's on top of mind of many Canadians right now, and so many people are many people are afraid of it. So, like to get your thoughts on AI. Is that in fact going to take away our jobs? Is it going to impact the labor force or the workforce?
You know, AI is on the tip of everyone's tongues right now, right? Is it going to make me lose work? Am I going to get paid less? In fact, what we all need to do, I think, is see AI as an enabler. And what I mean by that is AI is there like any tool. Just think to the early days of a blade or a saw. You use those tools to accomplish an end goal. So, what we're seeing from the data is that, in fact, when you compare the Canadian versus US market, Canada is less exposed to AI, which means companies have not embraced it as wholeheartedly as the US has. And this is TD research that was done this past year.
Okay.
So what that means is that there's still room for growth, but what we need Canadians to be thinking about right now is how do we use AI to get a great job? And so again, going back to the TD research, what we're seeing is that AI is in fact for certain segments, particularly younger entry level graduates, is creating more jobs. So now when you're entering the job market or maybe you're mid-career and you're thinking, how am I going to make myself competitive in this job market, you want to show that you're already embracing the technology. So you want to be a doer rather than a seeker. So you want to be talking about, okay, I use AI on a daily basis as a linguist to do XYZ. So what do you do it with? You know, what are you using the tools for? And I think that is really the sort of mindset that's going to help people penetrate and transcend some of the chaos that exists in the marketplace right now.
Okay. Interesting. So you said it's going to create more jobs. AI is going to create more
Yeah.
jobs. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
And you also said Canadians, compared to our friends in the south of the border, they're not. We are not. We are far behind them in terms of embracing AI.
We're embracing it less industry wide. We
Yeah.
haven't, you know, all industries are getting disrupted in some form by AI, right? So
And
according
why?
to the TD,
Sorry. Why haven't Canadians done that? Why haven't Canadian organizations done that? Why do you think?
you know, that could be cultural. You know, you can break it down to sort of human by human experience. Some industries are slower to disrupt,
Yeah.
especially, you know, if you just even compare the banking sector.
Yep.
Yes, we are seeing big changes in how Canadian versus US banks operate
Yep.
and present themselves to the world. But you want to be thinking also about Canadians and who we are. We are people who are prudent in our approach to embracing change as
Yep.
a whole, right? What I
Yep.
mean by that is we're not these renegades who just go out there and will, you know, culturally, when you think of a Canadian, you think of Canadians as being, again, prudent. Just we take a minute, we think
Yep.
about how we're going to embrace the change, and then we move forward. Whereas other
Yep.
cultures,
Yep.
Americans are known for being very entrepreneurial, risk taking. And
Yep.
so that can help. Also, some of the largest, most innovative AI companies come from the US.
Yeah.
So that's going to trickle through in terms of
Mm,
exposure, how other industries embrace the technology. And going back to the banking sector, for instance, banks are at the end of the day regulated. There's a lot of changes that can't be put in place unless the
yeah.
broader industry approves it. So that's going to impact what people experience on a
Mm.
day-to-day basis when they're looking for a job.
Yes. How do you, in your opinion, how are job seekers taking advantage of AI to help them find work now?
I think that ChatGPT, when you look at some of the tools that are out there,
Yeah.
just beyond ChatGPT, cloud is one everyone is raving about. There's some new tools that are coming, such as Mythos,
Yeah.
that could have a negative impact, could have a positive impact. We're still sort of working through all that. What we're seeing is that these tools exist, and it's your job at the end of the day to figure out how to use them to make yourself more valuable in the job market.
More of
And
an asset, more of an asset to an employer.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So I, for instance, use a tool that has multiple AI systems built into it, and it costs something like $20 a month. $20. So that's the cost of a coffee, a few
Yeah.
coffees every month, right? So
Yep.
that's really democratized, if you will,
Yeah.
what it means to use this technology. That's $20 a month
Yeah.
is reasonable for most people,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So I think that we need to make sure that we are using this technology on a day-to-day basis so
Yeah.
we can have informed conversations about how it's changing whatever industry, whatever sector. So,
Yeah.
let's say you're a carpenter.
Yeah.
Carpenters, that is a job AI is not going to replace, right? There's a skilled trade, you use your
Yep.
hand. A
Yep.
person needs to do that job. But does
Yep.
that carpenter leverage AI to book meetings? Does he or she use it to scan for new clients?
Yeah.
To, record conversations like the one we're
Yes.
having right now
Yeah.
to help determine, okay, which client or customer am I going to prioritize right now?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's how technology fuels someone's growth. And that's how someone adds value, when they're sitting in front of a hiring manager like yourself or a
Yeah.
potential employer.
So what I gather from this is just is AI is in some cases may replace some of our jobs, but it's just going to be another tool in our toolkit that we can take advantage of
Absolutely.
and help enhance our jobs, make our lives easier.
Yeah, absolutely. And you really want to talk about AI as if it's a technology that is not going anywhere. And in fact, if you want to be prepared for future jobs, you need to be thinking about how do I level set myself to be competitive in an AI reality, in a world where quantum computing or some new iteration of technology is coming. So
Yeah.
that's when soft skills, Pino, really come
Yeah.
to the forefront, right? So can you influence a person? Can you get them on your side? You're having a conversation about um, you know, tariffs or
Yeah.
interest rates and how it could impact a business. Can
Yeah.
you have someone who may not necessarily see your point of view
Yeah.
think, oh, that's a really good, you know, uh, point that I didn't consider earlier.
Yeah.
Maybe I should reevaluate the situation. So
Yeah.
those leadership skills, those soft skills that we all have been told are important now more than ever, we're
Yes.
seeing them really, become the thing that differentiates one candidate from another. And
Yeah.
then more importantly, your leadership prowess. Can you prove I led, I scaled, I
Yeah.
did something?
Yeah.
You're a doer of what
Accomplishments.
at the end of the day?
Accomplishments.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And that
Yeah.
doesn't mean you have to lead a Fortune 500 company, Fortune
Yeah.
50. Did you, in university, were you in charge of some club? And in that club, what did you accomplish? Did
Yeah.
you bring down costs? Did you increase membership? I mean, there's so
Yeah.
many different
So
ways
quantify
to
your
spin.
metrics. Quantify metrics, right? Like, how
Exactly.
did you
Yeah.
impact the business? Show me. Give me
Yeah,
numbers, right?
exactly. Exactly.
In addition to that, too, I also want to add to grit. that's one thing that we don't
Yeah.
talk about enough about, like your determination, your willingness to go the extra mile, right? That
Right.
goes a long way as well too. So, Kumutha,
100%.
the unemployment rate. Let's switch topics
Yeah.
slightly. Let's talk about the unemployment rate. Let's talk about employers and hiring right now. What is the Canada national unemployment rate right now? Can you share that with us?
So I want to speak about it in terms of averages because I think that gives a little bit more context for Canadians right now. So on a month over month basis, and the reason this matters is because we're seeing sizable, you know, macroeconomic shifts. You've got the war, you've got trade chaos. All
Yeah.
of these things are impacting Canadians, and it's leading to economists saying, you know what, we have to actually reevaluate the market as a whole. So I want to look at sort of month over month for that reason. So, month over month, what we're seeing is that there's not a lot of change. That said, in being a business journalist, I know that it takes months for even one specific trigger to really impact the broader economy. So, for instance, let's just take the conflict in Iran, Middle East concerns overall, and how that's leading to sort of a recalibration of companies, their growth, whether they want to expand into the US or whether they want to expand into the Middle East, whatever the case may be. Month
Yeah.
over month, we're not seeing sizable changes that are really worth noting.
Okay.
But as I said, that doesn't mean that next month, the month
Yeah.
after, we're not
Yeah.
going to really see that feed into the economy.
Yeah.
And then if you look at the broader picture, we're
Mm.
seeing a lot of voices at sort of the BOC level saying that we're going to have to reassess because, as we know, this war that we're all praying would only last for a few days is in fact now going
Months.
longer, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, and that is data that is important again, because if Canadians are feeling the impact of higher fuel prices at the end of the day.
Yeah.
If they feel the impact of food prices
Yeah.
increasing,
Yeah.
then they're going to be demanding higher wages,
Yeah.
right? You need to
Yes.
keep up with the cost of living. Well,
Yes.
as an employer, if you
Yeah.
see that the cost of living is going higher and
Yeah.
people want higher wages, you're either going to stop hiring because you're like, I can't afford this right now. I can't
Yeah.
afford this new role.
Yeah.
Or you're going to double down on that, but then you're going to have to cut other places. So it's sort of this very difficult task that central bankers have globally, and Canada is no different, where you need to balance growing the economy with the reality of what are people facing on a day-to-day basis and how do we reduce some of their fears in terms
Yes.
of, how do I afford food, something so basic.
Yeah, I mean, I did grocery shopping on the weekend. I can't believe the cost of food skyrocketed. It's just it's crazy, right? But I think from sitting through this, in this chair through my lens, employers are just, I think they're proceeding with caution, right? They're
Yeah,
like, we need to hire, but let's just see how the next quarter plays out. And then we'll assess it then. But I think everyone's proceeding with just being very careful, let's say right now, I would say, right?
absolutely.
Yeah.
When you're being, sorry, go ahead.
No, I would say during the pandemic, we saw the labor market explode. There was such a demand for talent. Now it's gone the opposite. Now it's okay, yes, talent is a premium, but we're gonna hold off. And again, just we're treading slowly right now.
Yes. So
Right.
when they say that they're treading slowly, are they thinking this is a quarterly pause
Yeah.
and we have hope? Because hope is really profound, right? When
Hmm.
you read all of these economic surveys are about consumer confidence, and in this case, it'd be sort of grassroots observations about hiring confidence. Are
Yeah.
they saying to you, let's just give it a pause for a few months, see what happens, and then we're going to proceed with our growth plans?
So I'm seeing both.
Okay,
I think it depends on the sector and the industry.
right.
Right. I think like there's some organizations right now that are doing mass hiring where other sectors or some of our other clients are saying that we're going to pause it. Again, we're going to see how this next quarter plays out, and just again, we're slowing things down, right? So the hiring is not at the same pace it was maybe 2 years ago, right? It's definitely slowed down. We're definitely seeing it, and a lot of the colleagues that run other staffing firms are saying the same thing, right? So,
And could you
but
give some insight on who? what are those sectors that see the growth versus those that are taking a more
Yeah,
cautious
like
approach?
we're seeing like just in the construction industry, it's they're not building new homes as they once were, so that's going to impact a lot of the hiring, right? So I have a friend that she runs a small staffing firm in the construction space, and she's seeing, like it's just not we're not hiring again. Our organizations are just not hiring at the same pace they once did. We were spoiled during the pandemic. Staffing firms were exploding because again, the demand for talent back then just out the roof. Now again we're seeing a shift now. We're seeing, okay, it's definitely slowed down, right? Manufacturing is definitely slowed down. It's not that same pace it once was. So it's again it's on a case by case basis and industry specific. So my phones years ago, Kumutha, were nonstop. Now the other way, we're seeing my phone job seekers. I get 20 calls a day of job seekers looking for work, people unemployed, have been impacted by downsizing, restructuring, and they can't find work. Employers are
Mhm.
flooded with applicants right now. They're getting 1,000 resumes per job posting, and that makes it there's a bigger demand now. It makes it harder for an employer to find someone now because they that you think they have a bigger pool. The quantity's there, the quality is just not there,
Mm,
right?
yeah, yeah.
So it's an interesting time in our economy for sure, right? And then again, you add that war that was supposed to be a week, and now we're into months, right? So
Yeah.
it's Canadians are proceeding with caution, I think is a good way of putting it. Kumutha, we are not in a formal recession, right?
No, we're not
We're
in
not.
a formal one.
Yeah.
It's not a textbook case.
Yep.
There are stagflation concerns, and all of these, there's technical sort of wraparounds around what that means. And, what the data is suggesting is that there are some areas where we're seeing glimmers of hope, and then there's other areas that we're seeing less hope. So,
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
instance, when it comes to inflation, the
Yeah.
expectation is that inflation is going to be more pronounced in the months ahead.
Okay.
And when it comes to growth, there's going to be an impact. So, what are the levers? It gets really hard for central bankers. There's only so much that they can control. They can bring down interest rates to
Yeah.
grow the economy.
Yeah.
But if you do that, inflation runs amok, right? So
Mm,
then there's all of these various things that we can't control. And going back to my earlier point about,
mm.
well, they can make a change today,
Yep.
but in a few months is when you really feel that change, if
Yep.
any, right?
Yep. Yep.
Even something as simple as borrowing costs. If you want to get a
Yep.
bank loan, you're going to feel that
Yeah.
in your pocketbook if you
Mhm.
are someone who wants to buy machinery to expand your business. If
Yeah.
you feel that the borrowing costs are too high, maybe you're not going to borrow that machinery to grow.
And
The
then
other thing I
yeah.
wanted, sorry, go ahead.
No, 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 you go ahead, please. Sorry.
I was just going to say that, the other thing that you want to consider in sort of the broad spectrum right now is that our central bankers are taking this wait and see approach that really sort of closely mimics. I remember, leading, Bloomberg's coverage of central bank decisions a few years ago. Tiff Macklem was talking about this wait and see approach with the expectation that inflation was going to moderate. And that was a few years ago.
Mm.
And that hasn't happened because the surprise war has completely changed the world, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that is going to force everyone to sort of think about, okay, what is coming next and how do we prepare for this? and
Right.
and to your point, employers are also hesitant because they don't know
Yeah.
if there is an end in sight to all of
Yeah.
this.
Yeah. It's a tricky time. To be specific, we're talking about the war in Iran, not the war between Ukraine and Russia, right?
Yes, exactly,
Yeah.
just to be clear, exactly,
Yeah.
because that the war in Iran is a catalyst economically to the
Yeah.
higher price of everyday goods. We're already seeing that. So happened
Okay.
a few months ago, and we're seeing, fuel prices, food prices, as we mentioned, already
Yeah.
go up because accessing those products has become more expensive.
Yes. Kumutsa, can you comment on the government? Is the government doing enough to stimulate the economy, in your opinion? Can you shed some light on that?
Everyone wants to find someone to blame. I would say the
Yeah.
government is doing what any
Okay.
government should be doing, and that
Yeah.
is assessing the data that's in front of them. Just to give you sort of a broader landscape right now,
Yeah.
the European Central Bank, the president said, we're also assessing data, and they have some of the most rich data because we're talking about all of the member states in the EU who feed information in terms of growth and hiring and all that. And they're also trying to figure out what's coming next. What is next month going to bring in terms of
Yeah.
costs and labor retention or lack of retention.
Yeah.
So the Canadian central bank is doing exactly what it should be doing, which is taking a wait and see approach. And I know that is sort of frustrating for people because everyone wants clarity in
Yeah.
the times that we're in right now.
Yeah.
But there's only so much that any central bank can do in terms of bringing down these costs.
Yeah.
The reality is that at the end of the day, every individual has to find a way to position themselves to be competitive. I can't, this is not a blanket statement or judgment on any sector or type of people, but it's
Yeah.
if you're looking for work, how do you make yourself more competitive with these certain realities
Yeah.
taken into consideration?
Yeah.
What are those realities? AI, tech skills being valuable,
Soft skills you talked
lead,
about.
exactly, leadership,
Yeah.
communication.
Yeah.
How can you leverage those? And I speak to CEOs through
Yeah.
my work as through my consultancy,
Yeah.
and you speak to them on the other side with the hiring. I
Yeah.
speak to them and helping them brand their businesses and to grow. You know, the difference between a, a few million, tens of millions in terms of an investor round
Yeah.
is significant. And that comes down to how do you brand yourself? How do you position yourself in the marketplace? So it
Yeah.
really just shows you that everyone is trying to figure out how do I compete
Yeah.
in these troubling times? And how do I make myself stand out? And that is a very much an individualized process that you have to go through.
Yeah, it's a very good question. How do you stand out from the crowd? What can you do
Yeah.
to get noticed, right?
Yeah.
So, Kumutha, listen, I'm gonna wrap up. I know we're kind of pressed for time, but thanks for doing this. For those who are watching this right now and want to connect with you, how do they do that?
Absolutely. Thank you so much again for this opportunity,
My
Pino. And
pleasure.
you
Yeah.
add so much value to society with interviews like this because I hope it gives everyone some sort of clarity in terms of how they can move forward. So really, it is a value to society. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yes. And so to get in touch with me, the best thing is LinkedIn. And as I
Yeah.
mentioned sort of earlier in the call, I've leveraged my experience as a journalist
Yeah.
working in different markets. And now I advise CEOs on building their own personal strategy for media. And then I also do speaking, both moderating and hosting for events globally. And the
Okay.
best way to reach out is through LinkedIn. So looking
Okay.
forward to connecting with people.
You also have a website as well too.
Yes, absolutely. So website is my name, kumutharramanathan.com.
Awesome. Kumutha, thanks for your time. I'm going to share this on my platform and yeah, we'll do this, definitely do this again. Thanks for your time.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Awesome. Take care.